This is our news, the weekend edition, and on the broadcast tonight, government moves to iron out kinks 2 weeks after VAT increased to 12%. Plus, a former PLP cabinet minister comes out in full support of the legalization of marijuana. And find out how one Bahamian American says his upbringing is helping him to change the world.
Our news is brought to you by Alive.
Good evening, I'm Andrew Knowles, and thanks so much for joining us. Topping the news. 2 weeks after the 60% increase in value-added tax came into force, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Peter Turnquest is admitting that the implementation has been not flawless. Turnquest says while there have been some hiccups, there has also been progress with groups who have expressed serious concerns about the impact of the VAT hike on their industries. Our Jasmine Brown leads us off tonight with this report.
Turnquest says the biggest issue surrounding the VAT hike was due to tariff codes that were not distributed to customs brokers prior to the increase.
The hiccups really are more technical than they are, affecting everyday citizen. And in respect to the tariff codes, there's been some amendments to the tariff codes to comply with the World Customs Organization.
Shortly after VAT increased from 7.5% to 12%, Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation CEO Edison Sumner told the media that some businesses were having trouble claiming their shipments from the Customs Department. But Turnquest says since then that issue has been remedied.
There was some delay in printing the booklet so that brokers will know which code to use, what the new codes are. That's all been resolved as I understand it, and that information is available to the brokers.
Following the announcement of the VAT increase in May, the Chamber and several associations had insisted the increase was too quick and did not allow time for businesses to adjust. The Bahamas Real Estate Association had requested a meeting with the Minister of Finance. The nearly 700-member organization had called for Turnquest to consider delaying the tax hike for the industry so as to not shock the market. Turnquest says the government and BRIA have since come to a consensus.
We continue to offer that kind of help where there is a legitimate concern, but at some point we do need to enforce the tax. And so for transactions that occurred prior to July 1, they will carry the 7.5%, even if it is a project that may run over. But as of July 1, any contract that's entered into will be at the new rate.
Meantime, the BCCEC has compiled questions, concerns, and challenges coming into the Chamber office following the application of the VAT hike on July 1st, in a bid to create a document for the government that lists the queries of the private sector. Reporting for Our News, I'm Jasmine Brown.
All right, thanks a lot, Jasmine. Well, former Cabinet Minister George Smith says he supports the legalization of medical and recreational marijuana. Smith says it's important that it's a process guided by healthcare professionals.
I support the use of medical marijuana, properly prescribed by physicians and dispensed by entities properly licensed, and I said by prescriptions by professional physicians. So I support the use of marijuana for medical purposes.
Political, church, and civic leaders have flocked to support medical marijuana after the CARICOM Regional Commission on Marijuana recommended an end to prohibition. Support for recreational use has been less significant, but Smith says there's room for that as well.
And for recreational purposes, if we could lay out distribution centers and so heavily tax it, as was supposed to have been the case with the numbers business. Make sure a sufficient amount of money is taken in tax on it to help to deal with the misuse of it. So properly distributed, properly governed, quantity for recreational purposes.
Smith says history shows that prohibition isn't effective in actually stopping people from using illegal substances.
The reality is it's happening in the Bahamas today. Just like at one point they had to legalize the use of alcoholic beverages, properly managed, properly distributed. I think that we need to take some of the tax we get from alcoholic beverage and put it towards assisting people who become victims of alcoholic abuse. Just like we should tax the use of marijuana to help those who become a victim of abuse.
Smith says far too many young men have their lives adversely affected due to possessing a small quantity of marijuana.
Besides that, there's a whole lot of young people up in Fox Hill Prison who are there because they dare to smoke one joint. But I know that sometimes that very vulnerable young man who perhaps has not had the parental guidance that he deserves, that he should have had. Maybe he's a product of a one-family home, one-parent home. And he's caught and he's taken before the courts, he's sent to Fox Hill. And we all know that there are some people, privileged people, who get it and they smoke it in their private surroundings and in perhaps a bigger quantity than the young fellows up in Fox Hill. One day we got to take a whole look at how many people are up there for these minor things that, and the record for those should certainly, we must find a way of expunging those records.
Well, a male pedestrian was struck and killed early this morning on the streets of Grand Bahama. Now, unconfirmed reports are that the man was struck by a vehicle which left the scene. Police were called to West Sunrise Highway, west of Yorkshire Drive, shortly before 5 a.m. Sunday, where they met the body of the unknown man lying in the road. When EMS personnel arrived on the scene, they pronounced the victim dead. Police are appealing to the public for any assistance in solving this latest fatality. The effort to eradicate smallpox may seem like a world away from the Bahamas. However, you may be surprised to learn of the role one Bahamian American had in ridding the world of that disease. Dr. Donald Hopkins was born in Florida to Bahamian parents, continues to fight diseases, now turning his efforts on guinea worm disease in Africa. Our Christina Dragovich spoke with the doctor, who isn't forgetting his Bahamian roots.
Dr. Donald Hopkins is no stranger to struggle. He's taken up the task of fighting guinea worm disease in Africa, along with former U.S. President Jimmy Carter and non-governmental organization, the Carter Center.
The main intervention against this disease is to help people understand how to protect themselves from it. This is a terrible disease. They don't like to have it. They much prefer not to have it. What's been missing is they haven't understood how to protect themselves.
Through education, Hopkins has helped to stop the spread of guinea worm disease in all but 2 countries. Education, he says, is the key.
Particularly in my work in Africa, I marvel. You go out into villages and I see children who don't have an opportunity to go to school. And I just wonder, knowing that each one of those little heads is different. We're all different, and there's no way of predicting what the capacity of an individual child is, and yet we know that every child is very well suited to do something if only they have the opportunity to be taught and to learn.
The importance of education was instilled in Hopkins from an early age, growing up in Coconut Grove, Florida.
My mother particularly just placed a very high premium on education, and she just stressed that. She herself was only able to go to 8th grade, but she really pushed all of us to, of course, complete high school. Most of us completed college.
Hopkins was the 7th of 10 children born to Joseph and Iva Louise Hopkins, and the first born in a hospital. The family grew in a close-knit Bahamian American community that Hopkins fondly remembers. In his spare time, he dives deeper into his Bahamian roots.
That's been a lot of fun because it's taken me to several places in the Bahamas. I've been down to Long Island, to Cherokee Sound, of course, and of course multiple times to Nassau, to the archives. My father was from Abaco, Cherokee Sound, and my mother was born in Miami, but her father was from Long Island, Turtle Cove, and her mother was from Harbor Island.
One of his most interesting discoveries? His great-grandfather was a lighthouse keeper.
James A. Hopkins was his name. He was lighthouse keeper during the 1870s for more than 10 years there at Nassau, the entrance to Nassau Harbor. And before him was Lewis Hopkins, my great-great-grandfather, who was a ship carpenter. He died in Nassau in 1850 and supposedly was 40 years old at the time.
At the age of 76, Hopkins is still heavily invested in his work. He says his access to education and the support of his parents, extended family, teachers, and scholarship donors are all to thank for where he is now.
I grieve when I see young people who have not discovered the joy of reading and of learning, and particularly now in this generation where so much knowledge is so easily available via the internet. I mean, there are dangers there, obviously, as well, but it's just so easy to get information about anything.
Hopkins says education is worth the investment of time early on. Reporting for our news, I'm Christina Dragovich.
All right, thanks a lot, Christina. And we will take our first break here, but still ahead tonight. One advocacy group calls on the Minnesota administration to enforce the law on the Child Protection Act. And later on, you can travel with Alive. Those stories and more coming up when our news returns.